Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, we'll talk to a producer and director from Hollywood who's on a spiritual journey, his mission and ministry just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, thanks to COVID, Hollywood is in an upheaval. Everything is changing, and that may be good news for producers and directors who are trying to do something different and unique in that space. To talk about that today, David de Vos. He is a producer and director from Hollywood. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. It's nice to be here.
Well, I want to know about your journey because I teased that it was a spiritual journey. How long have you been on this journey?
That's a very loaded question. I'll take you back to a real moment in time for me when I really was challenged in my faith and to go deeper in my faith, and that was the Haiti earthquake in 2010. I had been a Christian, grew up in a Christian home, but when the earthquake hit and I was invited to go down to Port-au-Prince with a group of pastors and doctors to do a documentary about the relief efforts, I didn't realize that I was going to become part of the relief effort. And there was a moment when I was filming, doing the documentary, and I had the camera up to my eye, and you can't miss as a documentarian. The carnage was everywhere. And as somebody who's trying to get shots that are compelling and dramatic, you couldn't miss. There was a shot, there was a shot, there was a shot. But what I realized, and it took me by surprise, when I pulled the camera away from my eye at one moment and I looked around and I was looking for my next shot, there was a woman who had been trapped in the rubble and pulled out, and she was paralyzed. And she was in this MASH hospital, totally dehydrated, couldn't move, 200 people in the room with only a few doctors, and she caught my eye. And I was just compelled to go over to her, and she needed water. And I didn't speak Creole, she didn't speak English, but I could tell just from the color in her face. And so I went up to the front table where they had a bunch of bags of water, took one, gave it to her. Immediately her color came back, her lips flushed. She was really grateful, and she just nodded at me. And I realized in that moment that by taking the camera away from my eye, I no longer had a filter between me and the people whose tragedy I was invading, who I was taking from. And it was such a profound moment for me that I put the camera down. And I've never been so happy in my career to miss getting footage. And I went to the doctors and I said, put me to work. I don't have any medical experience. I don't know what I'm doing, but use me. I want to help these people.
Wow.
And God reached into my heart in that moment, and he said, I don't want you to take anymore. I don't want you to be in this business for yourself anymore. I spent the first half of my career climbing that ladder and being competitive and trying to do all those Hollywood things. And I actually came back from that experience and made a movie about my own experience and change in heart called Eyes to See. And it was about a news cameraman that gets caught up in the tragedy and has a change of heart. And well, ironically, that movie was so difficult to make that I hung up my spurs. I said, I'm done with Hollywood. I don't want to do it anymore. It's too hard. It's not rewarding enough. I was still trying to do it for me. And so I went to seminary. I said, I'm out. And what was, again, ironic and a God moment, you talk about a spiritual journey. While I was in seminary, one of my professors pulled me aside and he said, I looked you up. He said, you can't hide here. What do you mean I can't hide here? I'm in seminary, for crying out loud. I'm trying to pursue a spiritual journey. He said, no, you're running. And it was like the voice of God into my heart. I had that Jonah moment where I was on the boat and the storms were happening. And he said, you can't run here. He said, you'd make a great pastor, don't get me wrong, but I don't think you're meant to speak to the same 200 people every week. You have experience, you have a career, you have something that is a platform that God can use that is much bigger, and that voice can be much broader. He said, I think that's what you're supposed to do.
Well, we're going to tell everybody why you're here in Dallas. We've got a graphic. You're speaking tonight.
I'm speaking at St. Philip's in Frisco to the youth. I'm really, really happy about it. It's going to be at 6 o'clock, and I'll be introducing the movie The Case for Christ, which I had the privilege and the pleasure of working on. I helped edit the movie. I have a co-producer credit on the film, and we're going to be showing it tonight. We're just inviting anybody and everybody who wants to come and be part of the conversation on faith in film after the showing of The Case for Christ. So if you're in the area and you want to stop by, please do. St. Philip's in Frisco.
Absolutely. And we're going to whet your appetite. So here's a trailer.
Somebody wanted to do an investigation into Christianity. Where would you start?
If the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen, it's a house of cards.
You sure you want to give me that loaded gun?
I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to pull the trigger.
I've spent my entire career as a journalist uncovering the truth. Until the day my wife presented me with the biggest story of my life.
I'm not going to lose my wife and my kids to something that I can't even reason with.
And what happened next changed me forever.
How can we even talk about historical evidence for the resurrection?
The Gospels are filled with contradictions.
The empty tomb is based on evidence. And isn't evidence your trade?
We all bet our lives on something.
The question is, what's it going to be?
As much as I would like to help out a fellow skeptic, what you're proposing is impossible.
Could Jesus survive being spiked to the cross?
There is no evidence of anyone ever surviving a full Roman crucifixion.
Just because I write something down and I bury it in the dirt, that doesn't make it true.
What I felt was something more real than anything I've ever felt in my life.
I'm praying for you.
Do you really want to know the truth, or is your mind already made up?
Stop blaming me and the church and God and do your job.
No one's ever proven if the shroud is the actual burial cloth of the Christ. But whenever someone looks in those eyes for the first time, suddenly becomes a real person.
Wow, I got chills. Now, I know it's always a challenge when you're taking a best-selling book that many people have read and turning it into film. What were the challenges that you faced?
Well, making a movie is a gargantuan undertaking on any level. And taking a book that isn't really a narrative, so to speak, and getting behind the scenes into Lee Strobel's life and what was his journey up to the point of actually writing the book. What was his inspiration in all of this? And so when we really dialed back in time and we realized his spiritual journey, we're like, oh my gosh, there's the story. And so through a number of iterations, a number of screenplay drafts going into production, we thought we need to make this authentic. We need to get as the best that we can do to make this a real movie that is compelling on a character level. It's not just message first. It has to be really, really authentic in its telling. And so the cast that came aboard this thing, Mike Vogel and Erica Christensen, just to play Lee and his wife were phenomenal. I mean, if you have a chance to see the film tonight, 6 o'clock, St. Philip's, Frisco, the performances they bring are so compelling that you can't help but go on this journey with this character of Lee. And so when he ultimately arrives at this case that he puts together as a journalist, like, we're going to try to prove this, right? Just in a court of law, what is the case you put forth? He starts to realize that there are still some questions yet unanswered in his case that can only be answered by faith. And I think, like a lot of us that are on a spiritual journey, whether we set out to prove something, ultimately we come to this point where there is a line in the sand where you've proven all you can prove. The evidence is in front of you.
Yes.
The question is, are you going to take that next step of faith based on what the evidence shows? And with this particular movie, done in this particular way, I love the ending of this film, and I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but it is such a powerhouse performance on Mike and Erica's perspective as Lee Strobel to come to that point where you're like, what am I going to do? In the face of all this pressure from, in Lee's particular situation, his journalistic world, saying you can't do that.
Let me ask you this, because when we were watching the trailer together, you said, I haven't seen this in a while, and that kind of takes me back. What is it like for a producer-director to be there with the audience watching the film? And, you know, some people are going to be moved. I mean, what is that like for you?
Well, I got into this business because I love people and I love the audience. I mean, I remember back when I was in high school working in the movie theater, I would go down and hide in the shadows next to the screen and turn around and watch the audience react to movies. It was the best. It was great. That's why we get into the film. And that's why we get into the business to make film. In this particular case, in the process, I keep telling people that ask me, like, oh man, making movies has got to be so much fun. I'm like, listen, there's a big difference between going to watch a movie and the experience you get from watching that movie and the process of making a movie and the experience of making a movie. And so by the time we sit and watch it with an audience, we've seen the film hundreds of times, all the way through editing and post-production and sound and all that sort of thing. And we've been through test screenings where you show a rough cut and then you get people's feedback and all that sort of thing. But when you have a chance to breathe and sort of take a couple of weeks off and then come to either a premiere or you get to see it in a theater with a paying audience, and you kind of sneak in the back and you sit in the back row, right? And you can quote every line in the movie because you just know it so well. It's not about the movie anymore. It's about the audience. And when you sense it, when you're in a room full of people that are watching something collectively, there is an emotional presence, okay, call it the Spirit of God, that is in a room where you sense when people are with you. And there is something incredible about this collective experience, especially with a movie like this. When you get to the end and you're literally holding your breath and you feel an audience relating, and that's when all the hard work and the years, this film took years to put together, all come to that moment where you're like, I love this business. I can't wait to do this again.
You are such an amazing guest. We're almost out of time. I want you to look into the camera on the right and give some advice, because, you know, we're in the middle of the Great Resignation. I think people are saying, you know, am I fulfilled with this job? You know, a person who might be wrestling with something right now, what would be your advice?
Well, first of all, please look into something bigger than yourself. I am a Christian. I believe in a God that can permeate your life in ways that you never thought possible. And so just that sense of reaching out and taking a step in humility to say, I can't do this on my own, that's the first step. When it comes to my own journey in making movies, I'm directing a film right now and post-production on, based on the book Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters by Meg Meeker. And I realized the other night as we were editing it that I just forgot about what time it was. I was so invested and so committed into the process of putting all these pieces together that we had shot in the edit room to make a scene that I just completely lost myself. And my hope and my prayer for you is, if you're struggling in this time where you're trying to figure out what you're supposed to do, try all kinds of things. Man, I did all kinds of things before I knew I wanted to make movies. I mean, I sold radio advertising. I worked in PR. I drove a tow truck, for crying out loud. I worked in a restaurant. I did all these things until one day I knew from an experience that I had working on a film, and it's like God reached down and said, this is what I want for you. And so if you're struggling, please put your faith in a God that can direct your life in a way that you never thought possible. And by taking a step of humility and saying, I don't know what's best for me, go out and try a bunch of different things. And then when you stay open and when you are finally given that thing that says, this is what I want you to do, you'll know it, you'll feel it. But this is not just all touchy-feely. You've got to put in the work. that 10,000 hour rule that you hear about, this rings true. I have spent 30 years in this business honing my craft and getting as good as I can possibly be, and knowing people, creating a network where the skills and the talents that you develop can be developed in a network, in friendship, in collaboration with other people. And you guys will all grow together. Never, ever underestimate the people that are going through that journey with you at that same level, because eventually that'll pay off.
David de Vos, thank you so much. You inspire me, and thank you for the goodness that you're putting out into the world.
It's my pleasure, Jeff.
Congratulations on your event tonight. Again, 6 o'clock, Frisco. We're going to put up the website to the church, which is stphillipsfrisco.org. Again, 6 o'clock tonight, 6400 Stonebrook Parkway. Thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.